And what she reveals immediately fractures the story fans thought they understood. This isn't a tell-all fueled by anger. It's calmer than that. Heavier. The kind of truth that only surfaces after someone has carried it alone for too long. While millions watched chaos turned into entertainment on Bad Chad Customs, there was another story unfolding off camera. One built on pressure, exhaustion, and invisible responsibility. Jolene didn't disappear. She endured. And the silence that followed wasn't weakness. It was survival. In this documentary, the edits fall away, the myths crack, and the quiet force that held everything together steps forward to explain what the cameras never showed, what the comments never understood, and why walking away was the only way to stay whole. Once you hear her side, you'll never watch the show the same way again. For years, fans of Bad Chad Customs asked the same question over and over again. Where did Jolene go? Comments stacked up beneath old clips. Rumors spread across forums and Facebook groups. Some said she was pushed out. Others claimed she couldn't handle the chaos. And a few insisted she was never important to begin with. Until now. Just minutes ago, Jolene finally broke her silence. And what she revealed immediately shattered the version of the story fans thought they knew. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't offensive. It was calm, measured, and unmistakably heavy. The kind of tone that only comes from someone who has been carrying the truth alone for far too long. Jolene didn't disappear because she wanted to. She didn't walk away chasing fame or attention. She vanished because staying quiet was the only way she knew how to survive what was happening behind the scenes. While viewers watched wild builds, heated arguments, and the unpredictable genius of Chad Hiltz, Jolene was absorbing pressure no camera ever captured. Reality TV sells chaos as entertainment. But living inside it is something else entirely. In her first public word since leaving the spotlight, Jolene admits that the silence nearly broke her. Every episode that aired without her explanation felt like another piece of the truth slipping out of reach. Fans filled the gaps themselves, and most of them got it wrong. What really happened wasn't dramatic in the way TV loves, but it was devastating in ways no episode could ever show. This documentary begins at the exact moment that silence ends. Because once Jolene finally speaks, it becomes impossible to watch Bad Chad Customs the same way again. And by the time her full story is told, one thing becomes painfully clear. The most important person in that shop was never the loudest one on camera. And the truth she's about to share changes everything. Long before television crews arrived and chaos became entertainment, Jolene lived a life far removed from viral clips and shop blow-ups. She wasn't chasing attention, notoriety, or reality TV fame. In fact, those close to her say she preferred structure, calm, and purpose. Qualities that would later place her in direct contrast with the world she stepped into. Jolene entered the Bad Chad orbit quietly. No grand introductions, no spotlight. She filled gaps wherever they existed. Organization, scheduling, emotional balance in a shop built on raw talent and impulse. She became the grounding force, not because she asked to be, but because someone had to keep things from falling apart. What viewers never saw was how essential she became long before the show ever aired. Bills needed tracking. Deadlines needed reminding. Tempers needed diffusing. Jolene didn't just help run the shop. She helped keep it functional. And while the cameras later focused on loud moments and explosive personalities, Jolene's value lived in the spaces between the noise. Friends say this was always who she was. Reliable, loyal, steady. She believed deeply in supporting the people she cared about, even if it meant standing behind them rather than beside them. That instinct, combined with her work ethic, would eventually put her at the center of a storm she'd never expected to face publicly. When the idea of television first surfaced, Jolene wasn't blinded by opportunity. She was cautious. She understood that once cameras entered their lives, control would leave it. But she stayed not for fame but for belief. Belief in the work, the vision, and the people she thought she could help protect. That decision would change everything. From the outside, Bad Chad Customs looked electric. Sparks flying, engines roaring, creativity unleashed without rules. Inside, it was something far more volatile. Chad Hiltz thrived in chaos, feeding off pressure and instinct. Jolene lived inside the aftermath of it. Days blurred into nights. Builds ran long. Money stayed tight. Promises were made faster than they could be kept. The shop functioned on adrenaline, not stability. And someone always had to absorb the fallout when plans unraveled. That someone was usually Jolene. While the cameras focused on wild ideas and explosive reactions, they missed the quiet damage happening between scenes. Missed meals, missed sleep, emotional exhaustion. Jolene became the unofficial crisis manager, calming customers, smoothing conflicts, and shouldering stress that didn't belong to her job description. The most difficult part wasn't the work. It was the unpredictability. One moment everything felt possible. The next it felt like collapse was inevitable. Jolene learned to live in a constant state of readiness, waiting for the next fire to put out. And when the cameras left, the pressure didn't. In fact, it intensified because now the chaos wasn't just internal. It was being broadcast, judged, and dissected by millions. Jolene wasn't just holding a shop together anymore. She was holding a narrative together. And it was starting to cost her more than she could afford to lose. Reality television doesn't reward quiet endurance. It rewards volume, conflict, big personalities. Bad Chad Customs thrived on exactly that, and Jolene slowly disappeared within it. As episodes aired, viewers formed opinions without ever knowing her role. Some dismissed her, others questioned why she was even there. What they didn't understand was that the show depended on people like her, people whose work couldn't be sensationalized. Jolene watched herself become invisible in real time. Scenes cut, context removed, moments flattened into stereotypes. Her contributions were edited away, leaving behind a version of reality that felt incomplete and unfair. Behind the scenes, the emotional toll deepened. Carrying stress without recognition is exhausting. Carrying it while being misunderstood is worse. Jolene began to question her own worth, wondering if the sacrifices she was making even mattered. And still, she stayed silent. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she believed speaking up would only make things worse. The show had momentum. The audience had expectations. Jolene felt trapped between protecting others and protecting herself. This is where the silence began. Not as a choice, but as a necessity. And by the time she realized how heavy it had become, it was already too late to turn back without breaking something. There isn't always one single moment that breaks a person. Sometimes it's a slow erosion. Day after day, promise after promise, pressure stacked so high that collapse becomes inevitable. For Jolene, the breaking point didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived quietly. By this stage, the shop was no longer just stressful. It was consuming her identity. Every problem became hers to solve. Every failure felt personal. Jolene began waking up already exhausted, carrying the weight of a business, a relationship, and a public image she never asked to manage. And the most painful part, no matter how much she gave, it was never enough to create stability. The chaos that fueled Chad Hiltz was slowly draining her. His creativity thrived on risk, impulse, and pressure. Jolene thrived on structure, communication, and trust. Those worlds were no longer compatible, and pretending otherwise was destroying her. What finally forced her hand wasn't drama. It was realization. Jolene understood that staying meant losing herself completely, that loyalty had turned into self-eraser, and that no amount of silence would fix what was fundamentally broken. So she did the unthinkable. She stepped away. No announcement, no explanation, just distance. Not to punish anyone, but to survive. In that moment, leaving wasn't weakness. It was the first act of strength she'd allowed herself in years. The moment Jolene disappeared, the internet filled the void. Fans of Bad Chad Customs speculated relentlessly. Some blamed her. Some erased her entirely. Others rewrote her role as insignificant, as if the shop had always run itself. What Jolene experienced next was a different kind of pain. Strangers dissected her character without knowing her. Comment sections turned into verdicts. She was called weak, replaceable, unnecessary. All while she was privately rebuilding from emotional burnout no one could see. The hardest part wasn't criticism. It was distortion. Watching people confidently explain her life, her motives, and her value while being completely wrong. Jolene wanted to correct them, to speak, to set the record straight. But she didn't because the truth was fragile, and she wasn't ready to expose it to people who only wanted entertainment. So, she stayed silent while the narrative hardened around a version of events she barely recognized. Every rumor became heavier than the last, and every false story made the silence more isolating. Jolene wasn't just gone from the show. She was erased from the story. And yet, she still didn't speak. When Jolene finally opens up about Chad Hiltz, it isn't what most people expect. There's no bitterness, no attempt to tear him down, just honesty, uncomfortable, balanced, and real. She acknowledges his talent without hesitation, his creativity, his vision, his ability to see things no one else can. But she also speaks about the cost of standing beside someone like that. The emotional volatility, the unpredictability, and the way brilliance can sometimes overshadow responsibility. Jolene explains that Chad was never a villain, but he wasn't a savior either. He was a human being struggling with his own demons, and she absorbed the consequences of them in silence. What hurt the most wasn't conflict. It was being unheard, being needed but not protected, being essential but invisible. Jolene loved him. She believed in him. But love alone couldn't fix the imbalance between them. This is the part of the story that changes everything because Jolene doesn't ask viewers to choose sides. She asks them to understand complexity. That two things can be true at once. The talent doesn't cancel damage, and that walking away doesn't mean the love was fake. It means the cost became too high. And this truth, spoken calmly after years of silence, may be the most powerful thing she's ever said. When Jolene finally stepped away, she didn't just leave a shop. She left behind years of momentum, identity, and opportunity that would never return. The price of staying silent became clearer only after the noise stopped. Career paths quietly closed. People assumed she was part of the show, not a professional with real skills. Others assumed she'd chosen obscurity. Jolene watched as the narrative she never controlled followed her into rooms she'd never entered. Even off camera, the label stuck. Emotionally, the damage lingered longer. Living in constant tension rewires a person. Jolene struggled to trust stability, to believe calm wouldn't suddenly collapse into chaos. For a long time, rest felt undeserved, like something that had to be earned through exhaustion. There were relationships she couldn't repair, moments she couldn't revisit, years she couldn't reclaim. And yet, the most painful loss was internal. The quiet confidence she once had in her own voice. She realized something hard but liberating. Sacrifice doesn't always equal reward. Sometimes it just equals loss and acknowledging that didn't make her weak. It made her honest. This part of her story isn't about blame. It's about accounting. About naming the things reality TV never budgets for. Mental health, identity erosion, and the unseen labor that holds chaos together. Only after she left did Jolene understand the full cost. And only then could healing actually begin. Life after Bad Chad Customs didn't come with a roadmap. There were no cameras, no applause, no dramatic comeback arc, just quiet mornings, slow rebuilding, and the unfamiliar task of choosing herself. At first, the silence felt hollow. Jolene had spent so long managing noise that peace felt unnatural. But gradually, something shifted. She began rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried under responsibility, interests, ambitions, and boundaries she'd never been allowed to set. She rebuilt carefully, intentionally, learning to say no without guilt. Learning that loyalty doesn't require self-destruction. Learning that walking away doesn't erase the good. Preserves what's left of you. People close to her noticed the change before she did. The tension eased. The constant vigilance faded. Jolene wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. And for the first time in years, the future felt open instead of threatening. This chapter isn't flashy. It's real. Healing rarely looks dramatic from the outside, but internally it was revolutionary. And it set the stage for the moment she never thought she'd reach. The moment she would finally speak. So why break the silence now? Jolene says it wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge, and it certainly wasn't about rewriting history. It was about reclaiming authorship of her own story. For years, others told it for her. Fans, critics, strangers online. The longer she stayed quiet, the heavier that misrepresentation became. Speaking now wasn't about correcting every rumor. It was about correcting one thing that mattered most, her truth. She doesn't ask for sympathy. She asks for understanding, for viewers to recognize that behind every loud personality on reality TV, there's often someone quietly holding everything together and quietly paying the price. Jolene's final message is simple but powerful. Silence can protect you for a while, but it can also erase you. And choosing to speak on your own terms is sometimes the final step in healing. This isn't a takedown, it's a release. And when the credits roll, one truth remains undeniable. Jolene was never just a side character. She was the backbone of a story no one fully saw until